When I came home during a college break, I had a simple plan in mind. I wanted to revisit my childhood bedroom, a space that always felt like a sanctuary to me. My mom, however, advised against it, telling me not to go in there. My dad chimed in, saying it was just being used for storage now. His words were casual, but I noticed a flicker of unease in his eyes. Despite their warnings later that day, I found myself standing in front of that familiar door. I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off. 5 minutes later, I was dialing 911, my hands shaking. I hadn't gone there expecting any surprises. I just wanted to sleep, to find some comfort in my old bed, surrounded by the familiar scent of the lavender candle I had left on the windowsill the previous summer. I returned home with a headache that pounded like a drum and a phone battery that was nearly dead. It was late, but not too late, just the kind of quiet late where the house feels suspended in time. When I arrived, my parents opened the front door, acting as if everything was perfectly normal. My mom greeted me with a smile, while my dad made a joke about the weight of my suitcase, trying to lighten the mood. I nodded, stepping inside, all the while calculating in my head how much sleep I'd missed that week, probably around 10 hours. Everything seemed normal, but that normalcy felt strange, like an eerie calm before a storm. There was no awkwardness, no raised voices, no strange looks, just a spotless hallway and the faint, clean scent of fresh laundry detergent in the air. I announced almost automatically that I was going to drop my bag in my room. That's when my mom stopped me. She said not to go in there. Her words rushed out too quickly. My dad added that it was just for storage now, his voice carrying a slight tension. He wasn't panicked. It was more like he was unsure about how this conversation would unfold. I paused, not for dramatic effect, but because their words felt strangely out of place. My mom quickly added that it was only temporary, as if trying to brush off the significance of it. She told me I'd be staying in the guest room this time. They moved on, but I didn't. My old room, the one place in that house that ever truly felt like mine, was suddenly off limits. No explanation, no warning, just a closed door. I didn't press them for answers. I followed them to the guest room, pretending it didn't bother me, even though it absolutely did. The guest room felt foreign and uncomfortable. It was mostly just a folded couch with an odd smell that hadn't been there before. There was a blanket, but no pillow, no lamp, no space in the closet. I sat down, and the springs resisted more than I anticipated. My mom asked if it was okay. I lied and said yes, but it wasn't. The rest of the night dragged on in an uncomfortable silence. We had dinner, but there wasn't much conversation. They asked the usual questions about school, and I answered. My dad brought up gas prices, and my mom laughed at something I can't even remember. It felt like we were all just going through the motions, following a script that no one believed in anymore. I went to bed early, or at least I tried to. I lay there staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The room was cold, my back ached, and there was an unsettling noise in the wall, pipes maybe, or something alive. My mind kept drifting back to that door, wondering why it was blocked off and what they might be hiding. It might sound trivial, but it didn't feel that way to me. It felt wrong. Sometime after midnight, I got up. I didn't check the time. I just knew I needed to see it, needed to know what was behind that door. The hallway was dim and silent as I walked cautiously, trying not to wake anyone, but also steeling myself for whatever I might find. The boxes that had been stacked in front of my door earlier were gone. Just gone. I stared for a moment, then reached for the handle. It was locked. My room never had a lock, not when I was growing up, not even after I begged for one in high school. I stood there, frozen, for far too long. Then I remembered the hiding spot, the back hallway behind the laundry shelf where they always kept the extra keys. I went there, reached behind the panel, and found a key taped in the usual spot. It was new and shiny, and for some reason, seeing it there surprised me. I didn't know what I expected, maybe that it wouldn't be there at all. I remember that day so clearly. I stood there with the key in my hand, hesitating. Part of me thought I might turn back, that I'd find some excuse not to go through with it. But I didn't. I took a deep breath and pushed the key into the lock. It turned with a soft click, and the door swung open. As soon as it did, a strange smell hit me. It was like dust and something stale, like the air hadn't moved in forever. I stepped inside, and that's when I saw it. My whole body froze. It was exactly what I feared it would be. No misunderstanding, no misinterpreted shadows or forgotten items. Just the undeniable truth staring back at me. 5 minutes later, I was outside dialing 911, my fingers trembling over the screen. I didn't go knock on their door or try to confront them. I simply waited for the police, standing there on the sidewalk with my heart racing. I couldn't bring myself to look back at the house. Not yet. It wasn't always like this. Growing up, I never suspected anything was wrong. That's the insidious nature of some families. They don't shout or lock you away. They make your favorite meals, smile warmly, ask about your day at school. They create a world where it's easy to believe that the unease in your chest is all your own doing. If you had asked me back then, I'd have said everything was fine. Great, even. I was the little sister, the one who watched and followed. Vivian, my older sister, was the trailblazer. She had the louder voice, the better grades, the shiny hair that seemed to catch the light just right. She wore blazers to school dances and somehow made them look cool. From a young age, Vivian knew what she wanted. Journalism, maybe some travel, perhaps even a master's degree someday. Everyone around her seemed to agree with her plans, nodding along and opening doors for her. I didn't mind, at least not much. I focused on my music, kept to myself, learned how to blend into the background. But even then, I noticed the little things. How Mom always made Vivian's favorite dessert but forgot mine. How Dad would cut me off mid-sentence to ask Vivian if she needed anything. Once, I voiced what I felt, saying, "I think she's your favorite." They laughed it off like I'd said something cute and silly. Mom said I was imagining things. Dad added that I was being dramatic. I learned quickly not to bring it up again. College made things clearer. Vivian had most of her tuition covered by Mom and Dad. Not all of it, but enough so she could spend her summers interning rather than working retail jobs. I asked once if they could help me out as well, maybe with a textbook or two. Mom's response made me feel like I'd asked for something extravagant, like a brand new car. So I worked through college, juggling jobs at cafes, taking admin assistant gigs, and tutoring, which I absolutely loathed. Meanwhile, Vivian was off studying in Florence, talking about how it deepened her understanding of storytelling. I, on the other hand, was deepening my understanding of overdraft fees. Now she's about to finish her degree and talks about taking a year off before grad school to travel. She wants to decompress, see the world. Thailand, Morocco, the Galapagos. She talks about these places like visiting them is her destiny. My parents are thrilled, practically glowing with excitement. They're already discussing logistics, talking about money and flights. I overheard something that stopped me in my tracks. They mentioned that maybe Grandma could help. Not Vivian directly, but they were discussing using part of Grandma's inheritance for the trip. Grandma, who's 89 and still very much herself. It was the casual way they talked about it, as if her passing was just a matter of time, like a transaction waiting to clear. They don't get it, and I haven't told them. Maybe I never will. It's not jealousy over Vivian's plane tickets, it's anger because of Grandma. We have something special, something no one else in the family seems to understand. My earliest memories are filled with the sound of music. My grandma was the source of that music, playing the cello and the piano with an elegance that seemed almost magical. She introduced me to both instruments before I was even tall enough to reach the pedals. Watching her hands glide over the keys or the strings was like watching a dance, and I tried to emulate that fluid motion when I was 10. I remember sitting beside her as she unlocked a special cabinet. I wasn't supposed to know what was inside, but she trusted me. Inside were instruments unlike any I'd seen before. Violins with intricate inlays, flutes with beautifully carved keys, and even a mandolin that looked ancient, like it belonged in a museum. She explained that these instruments were heirlooms, passed down through generations, never sold, but always cherished and played with care. Years went by, and one weekend, when I was home from college, she told me that these instruments were meant for me. It wasn't presented as a gift. It was more like a passing of the torch, a continuation of a legacy. It felt like she was entrusting me with a language, a part of our history. I didn't share this with anyone, not because it was a secret, but because it felt sacred. But of course, secrets have a way of getting out. My family found out, and they were furious. I overheard my dad late one night complaining about the unfairness of giving everything to me. Mom agreed, insisting that such things should be divided equally among the family. By family, they meant my sister Vivian. Vivian, who doesn't play any instruments, who once asked if the oboe was the one that sounded like a goose. The thought of it made me want to scream, but Grandma stood her ground. She made it clear that the instruments weren't for sale, that she was still alive, and she had the right to decide what happened to her possessions. I stayed silent, not because I was afraid to speak, but because there was no need. Grandma's word was enough. Then the break-in happened. Grandma had spent the night in the hospital for what they said was a minor issue, just a precaution. She came back the next day to find the back window shattered and the entire collection of instruments gone. Every single piece was missing. She called me, her voice shaking with tears I had never heard from her before. Not at funerals, not even when Grandpa died, or when cancer took her best friend. But this was different. She kept repeating, "They're gone. I thought I'd have time to show you." I tried to comfort her, suggesting that maybe insurance would cover the loss, but we both knew it wasn't about the money. It was about what those instruments represented. A lineage, a heritage that had vanished on her watch right under her roof. Just 2 days later, Grandma's health deteriorated, and she was back in the hospital, weaker this time. The doctors mentioned that stress was exacerbating her condition. I took a leave from work to stay with her, sitting by her bedside as she slept in fitful, restless intervals. It wasn't just the theft. It was the significance of what had been lost. Something that had been carefully preserved through generations was gone, and the weight of that loss was crushing. I felt an intense anger towards whoever had done this, and I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. The discovery came when I opened a door I wasn't supposed to. Inside, I found the cases, the instruments, every last one, hidden under a tarp in my childhood bedroom. They hadn't been stolen. They had been hidden. I couldn't breathe. I stumbled outside, shaking, and dialed 911. The dispatcher assured me that help was on the way, but I had no idea what soon meant on a quiet street, where nothing ever seemed to happen. I stayed outside, not out of bravery, but because I couldn't bear to step back inside that house. I didn't want to see the kitchen, walk through the hallway, or look at my parents asleep in their bed while Grandma lay in a hospital, suffering because of what they had done. I stood by the mailbox, my jacket half-zipped, nervously fiddling with my phone, hoping it would somehow make time move faster. Occasionally, I glanced back at the house, which looked perfectly normal from the outside, with all the lights off except for the one on the porch. That was the whole point, wasn't it? Everything seemed normal, but it wasn't. The patrol car arrived exactly 28 minutes later. I had been counting each second, clinging to my phone as if it were my lifeline. There were no sirens, no flashing lights, just the low purr of the engine and the quiet crunch of tires on the street. 2 officers stepped out, one older and one younger. They didn't seem surprised to find me standing there in the chill of the night. I nodded silently when the older one asked if I was the one who called. They didn't question why I was outside. Instead, they listened as I recounted everything calmly and clearly, as if I were reading from a script. I spoke about the instruments, my childhood room, the break-in that never happened. I told them about Grandma, the hospital stays, the insurance claims. I laid it all out in a voice that barely felt like mine. They asked if I wanted to remain anonymous, but I shook my head. It didn't matter to me anymore. They nodded, probably having heard similar stories before. One officer stayed with me while the other approached the house and rang the doorbell. Lights flickered on one by one, first upstairs, then in the hallway, and finally at the front door. My dad answered the door, looking confused in his rumpled clothes. He seemed more puzzled than alarmed, just waking from sleep. My mom appeared behind him, pulling on a sweater, her face mirroring his bewilderment. I couldn't hear what the officer was saying to them. His voice was low, just a murmur against the night. I stood on the sidewalk, not hiding, just keeping my distance. It felt surreal, watching my parents from afar as if they were strangers in someone else's home. The officers eventually stepped inside, closing the door behind them. I stayed outside, arms folded against the cold, my feet aching and my hands numb. I kept my gaze fixed on the house, not daring to imagine what was happening inside. I expected shouting, the sound of footsteps, slamming doors, but it remained quiet. Just shadows shifting behind the curtains, an occasional silhouette, and then nothing. I thought about Grandma, how she would have felt if she had known about what had already happened. About 20 minutes later, a second vehicle pulled up. This one was larger, with an empty cargo area and protective lining. They were there for the instruments, the evidence. 2 more officers emerged and spoke briefly with the first pair before disappearing inside. A few minutes later, they started bringing the cases out, handling them carefully, as if they understood their value beyond mere numbers. I watched without moving, each piece being carried out like it held a part of my past. The violin, the cello, the mandolin, all of them meant something, carried with a reverence that cut deep. The front door opened again, and my mom stepped out, scanning the yard. At first, she looked right past me, but then her eyes locked onto mine. No words were exchanged, no expressions changed. There was just that cold, silent recognition between us. My dad followed behind her, and they both stared at me, saying nothing. They didn't need to. Their eyes conveyed everything. What I had done, what they thought of me. Betrayer, backstabber, stranger. I didn't look away, holding their gaze, allowing the silence to speak volumes. Eventually, one of the officers returned to my side, informing me that everything had been cataloged. They were just finishing up the report. I nodded, mentioning that my bag was still inside and that I didn't want to retrieve it alone. He understood and walked with me back into the house. Inside, it was quiet, unchanged. My bag was already packed, waiting for me. I remember walking out without even glancing around, feeling like I was leaving more than just a house behind. My parents were there in the hallway, just standing silently, watching me go, not saying a word. It was strange, but I didn't even look at them, didn't feel the need to. Outside, I watched as the last instrument case got loaded up. The door of the second vehicle shut with a finality that echoed in my chest. Papers were signed. A clipboard passed one last time between the officers, and just like that, it was over. One of the officers asked if I had somewhere to stay. I shook my head, feeling the weight of everything settle in. I asked if they could take me to the hospital. He nodded, and I slid into the back seat, closing the door behind me. The drive was silent. I didn't glance back. There was nothing there for me anymore. They dropped me off at the hospital just after 6. I had my bag, but no real plan. Inside, I went straight to the desk and asked which floor she was on. Grandma was still in her room, still breathing, still hooked up to all those machines, but she was awake. When I walked in, she looked up and smiled like nothing had happened, like everything was just fine. I sat beside her, took her hand, and told her they found the instruments. She closed her eyes and let out a long breath. "Thank God," she said. I didn't tell her who had taken them or where they were found, just that they were safe now. That was all she needed to hear. She squeezed my hand gently, saying she always wanted me to have them. "That was always the point," she said. I nodded. She leaned back against the pillow and didn't say anything more. A nurse came in a bit later, checked her vitals, smiled, and said if she stayed calm, she'd recover. Around 7:30, I stepped outside. My phone was buzzing like crazy. 47 missed calls, countless texts, voicemails. Mom, Dad, Vivian, over and over. As I stared at the screen, it lit up again. Mom calling. I answered, her voice coming through loud, rushed, and angry. How could you do this to us? She said. I didn't say anything. You called the police, I reminded her. You embarrassed your own parents. You've destroyed everything. You hid the collection, I said quietly. You told Grandma it was gone. You submitted a false insurance claim. She's fine. My dad jumped in. She didn't die. She could have, I replied. Silence stretched on the line. Then Mom's voice again, trembling. We're your family. You don't treat family this way. You don't do that to Grandma. You've never been grateful, always turning things around, always making yourself the victim. I'm not the victim, I said. She is. You're not our daughter anymore, she said flatly. I didn't respond. Then Dad muttered something under his breath. She's old anyway. It just slipped out. I don't think he meant to say it aloud. Something inside me shut down, went quiet. You were waiting for her to die, I said. That's what this was about. Neither of them said a word to deny it. I hung up, blocked both numbers. Vivian called 10 minutes later. I almost didn't answer, but I did. Her tone was different, like she was trying to sound calm and failed. I heard what you did, she said. I did what was right. You called the cops on your own parents. They committed insurance fraud. They almost killed Grandma. Oh, come on, she said. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. We just needed the money. It's not like anyone was hurt. Grandma was hurt. She's old. There it was again. You're really going to throw away the whole family over this? She asked. I didn't say anything, Romy. You've always been dramatic. You act like the world's out to get you. But I ended the call. Blocked her too. I sat down on a bench outside the hospital. No family, no more noise, just air. I didn't cry, I didn't break down. I didn't feel liberated or strong or heroic. It's been 6 months since everything unraveled. I haven't reached out, and I haven't heard from them either. The last bit of news came through my cousin, a short, hushed message. They admitted guilt. They've been sentenced. 1 year of house arrest, 400 hours of community service, felony charges on both counts. They wear ankle monitors now, tethered to their home unless it's to pick up trash or volunteer at a food bank. Everyone knows. Neighbors who once greeted them now avoid crossing paths. They stood in court and apologized. Not to Grandma, she wasn't there, but to the judge, to the official record. No family showed up, not even Vivian. She vanished from social media for a time, only to re-emerge as if nothing happened. A new profile picture, an inspirational quote about inner peace. Comments turned off. It was as if she believed that if she controlled her narrative tightly enough, the truth might forget her role in it all. Grad school is on hold. The big trip never took place. Her last update mentioned she's back home, not working, barely posting, and making no real plans. As for me, I'm done watching. I've moved on. Grandma just marked her 90th birthday last week. She's home, she's healthy, and she's sharper than people half her age. We had a birthday party for her, small but heartfelt. Her closest friends, the ones who never stopped calling during her toughest times, were there. Some of her former music students came too, with their own kids in tow. Perhaps they wanted their children to meet the woman who taught them to play with meaning in every note. Grandma wore her favorite cardigan, the one with pearl buttons, and laughed genuinely throughout the afternoon. Not just polite laughter, but the kind I hadn't heard in years. Her instruments were back, no longer evidence in a case file. We placed them in a corner of the room, not really for use, just to be present. I assumed no one would play them, but as the afternoon light filtered through the curtains, Grandma stood up and approached the piano. She didn't ask, didn't hesitate. She sat down, as if it had been calling her all day. The room fell silent, and then she played. Not a full song, but enough to make your chest tighten and your throat catch. She played like she was still 60, as if the past year hadn't taken anything from her. When she finished, a friend commented, "90 looks good on you." Grandma smiled and replied, "Might have another decade in me if nobody tries to kill me again." The room erupted in laughter. But I didn't laugh because I believed her. She's 90 and still here. Still playing. Still sharp. Some people think aging gives them permission to stop noticing, to forget when someone reaches a certain age. But no one decides how much time someone has left just for convenience. Grandma may live to 95, 100, or beyond. I'm not counting. I'm just showing up. She doesn't talk about my parents or Vivian anymore, and neither do I. The instruments are back home. The music has returned. For us, that's enough.